Alikais once said, "Free and independent media underpin any vibrant democracy." Kenya, like many nations across the world, is a democracy as per the Constitution and prides itself in having one of the most vibrant media in Africa. But there is an emerging trend that could be a major threat to the independence and freedom of the media if recent events go unchecked.
And some of the journalists arrested as they covered the Tana Athi River Development Authority, or TARDA, demolitions in Bere were assaulted by police.
And the Ethiopian Attorney General has ordered the immediate release of journalist Yasin Juma, citing wrongful arrest.
We begin our broadcast in Tanzania, where President John Magufuli often makes waves for refusing to accept criticism of himself and his policies.
Military police beat up a number of journalists, with some having been hospitalized as they covered former presidential candidate Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu, that is Bobby Wine.
Somali police detained journalists.
If
Gashuri quickly turned into a nightmare. Gashuri had just concluded a live link to update the country.
What problem do you have with the media? This man has been
office in 2015, and critics say since then his government has squeezed press freedoms through harsh media laws.
Feel that funds Juma inciting violence and plotting to kill senior Ethiopians.
Also kicked him out of Johor City and seizing his equipment.
I was raided by 12 heavily armed guns. It was
we're just beating everybody as long as you're not in a military police uniform or the police uniform. Yet I could no longer continue running with the NTV car. The driver is me. I jumped in the car as the car was moving, but this military policewoman targeted me and still continued to beat me as I tried to close the door to the car.
Nataka kuona kwa mikono ya kwamba hiyo ni mambo ya puzi. Ya upuzi. Sasa tuendelee, mimi nataka kujua
and the facts and not knowing what is going on. That's when you are able to really thrive in dictatorship and authority.
Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they have assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom.
Remember,
press.
We assume them to be absolute. We realize that absolute. official information and not any other source of information. Is within the broad umbrella of human rights, access to information, and so the players in this field, that is the media, have been given. They are, fought for.
So much for joining us, and I will be leading you through this discussion today. Joined by some remarkable people from introducing them. So Mwape Kumpembwa. Mwape is from Zambia, and she has more than 15 years experience in broadcast journalist media. She's currently the managing director of Crown Television, which is a private international in reporting. Thank you so much for joining us, Mwape. Next, we have Mr. Eugene Fongwa, who is from Cameroon. Eugene is an accomplished development professional who specializes in employing trusted media and creative communications to drive social and development change in Africa. He's an award-winning reporter and has trained more than 200 journalists and community media workers across Africa, with a special interest in coverage of environmental protection, climate change, and reproductive health, among others. Eugene is currently the head of communications and knowledge management at Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us, Eugene. Next, development, and he's a news editor, Organised in Africa. Welcome, Kofi, for joining us. Next, we have Mr. Kwamchetsi, sorry about that, Mr. Makokha, who is from Kenya. Mr. Makokha has worked as a journalist in writing, editing, training, and management roles for over 20 years and has been in the front line of the struggle for human dignity. Mr. Makokha has been a contributor in academic literature that has shaped the media landscape in East Africa. He has also served as a communications advisor to the Office of the Chief Justice in Kenya between the year 2011 and 2015, where he was responsible for public policy dialogue and engagement. He's currently been involved in establishing and sustaining online community platforms for victims of atrocities in Kenya, Burundi, and the Gambia as forums for reclaiming agency and demand for justice. He's currently a program advisor at Journalism for Justice. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Makokha. And lastly, we have Ms. Aisha Umukobwa, who is from Rwanda. Aisha is passionate and is a professional journalist with over 13 years experience in reporting and editing. Aisha has worked with various media houses and broadcasts in broadcasting and print in Rwanda. She's also a freelance journalist currently, and she founded a website with the editorial line of reporting on human rights issues, and is a member of the Women's Media Owners for Change, which is a network of women owning media organs in Rwanda with a vision of raising women through media. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We're going to have an interesting conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I think we'll just dive right into it so that we can get a lot more from all of you. So as we discussed, reclaiming the shrinking press freedom as the title of this conversation, I'd like to hear from each of you about your experiences in your different countries. What is the state of press freedom in your countries? And I'd like to start with Mr. Kofi, who is from Ghana. I know Ghana has been leading in the continent for various things. They've been winning. So I want to know, are you also winning with the press freedom? So if you can hear me, Mr. Kofi, would you like to start by answering this?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a privilege to meet such great personalities on this platform.
Kofi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so that's fine. We can start with Mr. Eugene, who is from Cameroon. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the current state of press freedom in Cameroon? We know of the Anglophone and Francophone issue. How is the state of that? Would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join this conversation. And good afternoon to everyone who's following us from wherever you are on the continent. Now, I think the first place to start is to note that the press in Cameroon is quite a young one. Our media landscape was only liberalized in the 1990s. So most of the developments that have occurred in the country have taken place over the last few years. And now, one of the things we want to notice, Cameroon still has a criminal libel system, and advocacy to change the situation has not quite worked. Last year, for example, the Committee to Protect Journalists recorded at least 9 journalists who were jailed in the country. We've also had situations of journalists who have been brought to be heard before military courts for work that they did as journalists and for things that they did as journalists. So it's a space that is quite difficult to exercise in. The other thing is that journalists in the country lack a legal protection or any kind of protection at all. Journalists covering protests, for example, and you did mention the Anglophone crisis and even the Boko Haram crisis in the northern parts of the country. We have seen many journalists covering these issues who have been arrested and treated as terrorists just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or even just covering protests related to election disputes. So there is really no protection for a journalist when you are out in covering a protest. You're treated by the security forces as anyone else on the ground. So these are the kinds of challenges that the media landscape has that is affecting freedom of expression. But one that is quite important and which is often forgotten is that the media lacks economic viability. And the weakness that arises from this makes the media vulnerable, especially to special interests who can use the media to advance special interest agendas, as well as limit the ability of journalists to work independently and become very, very vulnerable to being silenced by those who are either in a position of power, whether it's political power or economic power. So not to monopolize the conversation, let me limit my initial remarks to these 3 points. Can you hear me? So I'm limiting my initial remarks to these 3 points. We can carry on with the conversation, and I will respond to any other questions you may have.
Issues concerning the lack of economic viability, and therefore, media being at risk of being influenced by special interests. And that's something I would actually like to know even further from Kofi. Is this the case in Ghana? I know Ghana has been winning quite a bit. Is it the same for media freedom? What do you think?
Not quite. I think Ghana continues to be seen as one of the most democratic countries in Africa, and currently the country is ranked number 1 in Africa in terms of the World Press Freedom ranking. Even globally, Ghana occupies an enviable 30th place, though in the past couple of years we've lost about 3 places on the chart. So there is a bit of vibrancy in the media environment here in Ghana, where journalists expose corruption, highlight incompetence and crime, and of course demand a measure of accountability from the powerful. So comparatively, the media in Ghana is favorably placed. In fact, Ghana's constitution recognizes media freedom and independence, which of course relates to the obligation of the state to prevent, prohibit, and most importantly, investigate crimes against journalists. But I must also say that in practice, this doesn't always happen. And there's been recurrent attacks against journalists, which requires the Ghanaian authorities to take all the necessary measures to increase the protection of the media and security of journalists. I immediately can refer to the perpetrators of the murder of investigative journalist Ahmed Hussein Swale in 2019. And as we speak, the perpetrators are yet to be brought to justice. So the delay in holding someone accountable in such an incident of killing such an investigative journalist does not really instill that confidence in the system for other journalists to feel protected. But generally, there is a sense of freedom. Comparatively, looking at what Eugene is sharing from Cameroon, then we say that Ghana is way ahead in terms of instilling press freedom in the country.
Great, thank you for that. That's very interesting. It sounds quite nice to be Ghanaian, to be honest. And I think if we can go right to Rwanda, which some people might say is quite different from Ghana, given the kind of political system that is there with the current president, Mr. the president. So I'd like to go to Aisha. What is the current state for you? Could it be compared to Ghana? Could it be compared to Cameroon? We'd like to hear some thoughts about Rwanda. Are you able to hear me, Aisha? No. Okay. No. Okay. If Aisha can't hear me, probably we can go to Zambia. Let's see what is up with Zambia. I'm actually quite curious. So we can go to Mwape. There was a recent event where one of the stations in Zambia actually had a guest who was part of the opposition on a breakfast show, and the station was closed. Is this what the case is in Zambia? I'd love to hear about that. Mwape, can you hear me? Okay. If we don't have Mwape on the call, Mwape, can you hear me?
Yes, I can get you.
Oh, okay. Did you hear my question?
I'm having problems with my nets, so it keeps on dropping.
No
trying
problem.
to connect to a stronger network.
Okay, that's okay. We were just discussing the state of press freedom in each of our countries. And so I just wanted to hear from you, and what is the current state in Zambia? Okay, so maybe as we get Mwape back, I think we can go to Kenya, which is where I am from. And we can have Mr. Makokha. I believe you can hear me, Mr. Makokha, right?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. How would you describe the state of press freedom in Kenya?
Thank you. I'm going
And given
to
your vast experience, I think it would be nice. Sorry?
I will try to take a broader sweep than just Kenya because I have a little experience around Tanzania, and I'm also in contact with colleagues in Uganda. And since Aisha is here, I don't want to speak about Rwanda, but I could speak a little about Burundi. And I think the emergent picture of press freedom in the East African countries is that there is a pretense to secure press freedom through constitutional and legal protection. So if you look at the Constitution of Kenya and the Constitution of Uganda, they are fairly similar in that they actually provide for freedom of information and freedom of the press. But in practice, we have seen numerous incidents of journalists being harassed, being arrested, being beaten up by security services, and in some instances being disappeared. In Tanzania, for example, Azori Gwanda, who disappeared about 3-4 years ago, still hasn't been found. A minister one time blurted out that he thought that he had died. In Kenya, more recently, I think, and I'm spreading this beyond just the people who are practicing in the newsroom. I'm also talking about colleagues who are involved in information dissemination, and in Kenya, one gentleman called Edwin Kiama has been arrested twice for use of the internet to post some historical article. And then recently he did a poster, I think, on loans, and he got arrested. So you find that there's a contradiction where there's constitutional and legal protection, but in practice, most regimes tend to fall back to form. And the general form is actually to clamp down on information they consider unpleasant or they don't want to get out. I also observed the Tanzanian election and found that the media was very, very constricted, despite clear provisions in the constitution for freedom of expression. There were new clawback legislation, like the Tanzania Communication Regulatory Authority, which resulted, I think, in the suspension of 6 media organizations. In Kenya recently, one TV station was Mount Kenya TV was shut down because apparently it was using it was posting content that was controversial or that was thought to be below the threshold period. Uganda has similar experiences. It's fairly routine. It's fairly routine, especially when these countries are going through a political season. That the repression against media tends to rise. Burundi is a textbook case. The constitution from the Arusha Declaration provides for freedom of the media. However, we all know that for the past 7 years, and I know this fairly intimately because I have run victim platforms in Burundi, that journalists are among the first targets of state agencies that want to clamp down on truth and information, especially around atrocities, crimes, and victimhood. So it's a fairly grim picture because on the surface of it, when our friends from Freedom House and other places come, they can tell you that yes, we are doing very well on the index. But those of us who are actually engaged in day-to-day interaction with the state are increasingly finding that the space is shrinking, and there are very few places to run to. The second thing, and I think this also is to acknowledge what Eugene was talking about with regard to Cameroon, is that media enterprises are financially in a very precarious situation, and that has seen many journalists finding that they don't have a livelihood, they cannot sustain their journalism. And so you find media organizations are having to release journalists through retrenchment or layoffs or sometimes just dismissals. That, in my view, constitutes a very, very serious clawback on freedom of expression. Don't let me talk for too long. I'm a former teacher, so I could go on forever.
I won't. I will not. Thank you so much, Mr. Makokha. Like, you brought up quite interesting topics, especially about the fact that media freedoms are actually enshrined in law, but then the practice has been quite different in most of those countries that you've talked about. And I think that's probably the same experience in Cameroon as well. And in just the prevalent thing that has come up out of these conversations is actually the issue of security. All three of you have talked about security issues, and also the issue of finances and economic capital viability of media. And I think this leads me to the next question, and I hope Mwape is on the call with us. I wanted to it would be interesting to know, like, what extent security issues and even economic viability would have when it comes to government transparency to get information, because media is driven by information. And so it would be nice to hear, if Mwape can hear me, to what extent government transparency has influenced the reporting in your country, and if you have experience in other places, that would also be nice to hear, and especially in the context of the pandemic with COVID. How has that affected reporting in your area? So Mwape, can you hear me? Okay, can we have Aisha? Aisha, I can see you. I don't know if you can hear me. Is your microphone on?
Can you hear me now?
All right. Yes, there we go. We can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question. The video is still breaking. Can you please come again with the question?
Yes. I was wondering, like, to what extent has government transparency influenced press freedom and reporting, especially in the context of COVID? Maybe you can give us the current state in Rwanda. Aisha, can you hear me?
I just hear, can you, my name only, Aisha, but...
Okay, could you give us the current state of press freedom in Rwanda?
The state of the press freedom in Rwanda, if you are still on that point.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Rwanda is not very different from other countries like Cameroon, as our colleagues say, but we are on the press freedom has been increasing in Rwanda from 1994 until now, with the big number of media houses. They are coming, the media outlets, day by day. The number is increasing. So this helps journalists to choose or to move from the media house to another, depending on what he wants to report on. But when before the media houses were few, like before 1994, we had only one television and two newspapers. Journalists were supposed to do what the government want, because there were no other way. There were no refuge to go. You couldn't choose the media house depending on your specialization. But now, even if now we are not at the good level, but we are still struggling to be free in press. And with the access to the internet, journalists are trying to use like social media, especially YouTube. If the media house, when the media house, a media house has also the social networks like YouTube, and that's where they try to, via those social networks, they try to be free to speak their minds, to do what they to send the message they want to send to the audience. That has been a good aspect for media in Rwanda about press freedom. But the government still has the control on the media. That's on the side of the authorities. And on the side of journalists also still have a self-censorship. Oh, there is some issues that journalists can't rise, like especially on politics. But when it comes on the conflict between countries, like in the region, journalists may be free to speak what he couldn't speak about his country. But when it comes from the other country, the neighboring country, you be free. And when someone asks you, you say it's a press freedom, have to be free. But in your country, there is still something like control of what you have to say, control of the media house that you will be using by publishing your story or your news, when it comes to broadcasting. But if you see the journey of media freedom in Rwanda, it's a long journey, but we are at a good step. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Aisha. That's quite insightful. It's interesting that your space, the press space in Rwanda, has been growing when other countries are talking about their spaces decreasing. And you've also brought out the point about government control when it comes to media in your country. And I'm actually happy that you brought that up because we all know, I mean, we've heard about the leadership under Kagame that has been quite almost authoritarian, some people would say. And so it's quite interesting that in as much as there's government control, the space is actually growing, which is quite interesting. And I think we'll just go back to the question that we had asked before concerning access to information. We've seen governments releasing information, especially during this COVID period, concerning the number of infections, the number of deaths, data on vaccination, how many people have been vaccinated, funding around the pandemic. And so it would be interesting to hear, and I'll ask Mr. Kofi, what is the current state of access to information in Ghana? Sorry, is this information that can be verified? How has the media been interacting with this?
Okay, unfortunately the line has been breaking, but I think the initial thought should be the impact of COVID itself, of course, has affected almost every facet of the economy, businesses, and of course, with a large majority of the media houses being privately owned and operated, definitely there's been a very large-scale impact on the media in general. But specifically regards press freedom, I think the media has been very creative and innovative in terms of access and dissemination of information. Initially, when the pandemic was up, I mean, during the outbreak somewhere in March 2020, information was very scanty. I think it was later that the World Health Organization came out with how to source information rightly. Nationally, there were issues regards how to source the right information and all that. So initially, when it comes to COVID, there were challenges in terms of access to quality information. But along the line, the media managed to be able to fight the fake news. Even though it still persists, that has been a major challenge in terms of fighting COVID, fake info. But this I must say was initially not the making of the media, because even in the from the professional perspective, the health sector, there were diverse information that were shared. I remember when it came to the wearing of face masks or nose masks, there were issues about whether we should wear when we suspect somebody to be sick, or it should be worn at all times. These were the type of information that were flying around. So information accessibility and access to the right information was a problem from the beginning. But I think along the line, the media has been able to assert themselves and better understand the dynamism of COVID, and been able to come out with the right information to share with their audiences. One of the things that I have found to be fascinating was the creativity in surviving the COVID period. In Ghana, there was a scare that this was going to wipe the opportunities for people, even in the media. And I must say, some lost their jobs along the line, some media houses, because of course they thrive on revenue from advertisement and all that. And when businesses are affected, inadvertently, the organizations could not run. It's been impactful business-wise, but content-wise, I think we've not done badly. Ghana managed to contain the spread of the disease because of the strong activism of the media in terms of quality access to information, and the state or the government also did a very good job in terms of information management. I think that has been one of the trump cards of Ghana, where at any point in time, the government, I think it was initially it was a weekly broadcast from the president himself telling us the state where we were and how to better protect ourselves, and what the government itself was doing to ensure that we stayed safe. So government information was also very helpful, and the media also managed to source the right information to feed to the public. So generally, I must say that in as much as COVID was a challenge in terms of putting people out of jobs and threatening job security, content-wise, the media in Ghana has done well to help contain the adverse effects of this pandemic. Thank you.
Great. That sounds very nice, Kofi. You've brought out key issues that are quite interesting. And I particularly want to pick out on the partnership with government concerning managing information and churning out information. And I'd like to hear from you, Eugene. Has this been the case in Cameroon over the pandemic period? What has been the experience for the media during the pandemic period, especially in terms of access to information?
I think that in the early days of the pandemic, the government was quite transparent and open with information. The Minister of Health provided sometimes updates on the situation of the pandemic in terms of the number of cases, the number of people who have been hospitalized, those who are recovering and those who have died. But I think in those early days, and it was really, really helpful that journalists were able to access this information timely. But I think that in those early days, the COVID-19 was still understood as a health emergency, and that the more information you put out, the more people are likely to behave in a way that protects everyone. But it also quickly became a political issue when people started interrogating the performance of the government, the wisdom of some of the decisions that were taken. And we began to see more reluctance from the government in terms of sharing information. People started interpreting the figures that they were saying as the increased number of cases, an indication that the government strategy was failing. Once those kinds of questions started emerging, we saw the government get back into the shell and shut out information unless it served a certain interest. And then as we moved on, it also became an issue of the management of the resources that were poured into combating COVID-19. And I think that the shrinking and the restrictions got a lot steeper. And as we speak, the main debates have shifted from whether or not we're doing well in terms of managing the crisis, the health emergency, to how well we are doing with managing the resources that have been placed at the disposal of the different stakeholders that have been involved in the fight against COVID-19 in the country. Of course, with the arrival of the vaccines, the debate has also shifted on the wisdom behind some of the government decisions, the choices of the vaccines that have been imported into the country. And these are very uncomfortable conversations for the government. And so we've seen a shrinkage of space with the evolution of the COVID-19 emergency in Cameroon. But one of the things that Kofi said, and which is very useful to highlight again, is the impact that it's had on the ability of journalists to do their work in terms of economic impacts. Journalists and media organizations lost a lot of revenue, especially during the second half of last year, because businesses were really, really operating at very minimized levels, and so had to also scale back in their advertising spending. And that could have affected the ability of the media to continue to provide the critical information that citizens need to make wise choices with respect to COVID-19. Perhaps that's also contributing to the spike and to the spike in the number of cases, but also in the amount of fake news that has significantly grown wider and stronger than accurate and useful information around the pandemic. So that's the state from Cameroon. And I may also add that this picture could easily fit any of the countries in the Central Africa sub-region, whether it's Gabon, Chad, or the Central African Republic, that have almost the same approaches to the management of public information and the management of the press, and even the understanding of the role that the press has to play in society. Thank you.
Great, that is very interesting, and I really like how you put it, that at first COVID started off as a health issue, and then it gradually grew into being a political issue, and people began questioning government decisions, and looking at management of resources, and even the issue of fake news actually. And I really like how you put it, and I'd like to go to Mwape if you can hear me. Has this been an issue in Zambia? Would you say this is the same situation there? If you can hear me? All right. Mwape, can you get us? No, okay. So I think I'll go to you, Mr. Makokha. And I'd like you to particularly discuss the issue of management of resources and how media has been keeping the government accountable in that sense, especially in the pandemic period. Do you think the media has been doing a good job, in your view, of highlighting these issues? And it can be in Kenya and East Africa as a whole.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's a very difficult question. I think when you're in the field playing, in the media. At times you can never quite tell how well you are doing. The broad context, and I think I like what Eugene was saying, which is that COVID has become part of our lives. And so it's a backdrop that informs a lot of other issues and questions. The most significant being that I think in the three all East African countries, it has defined media freedom in the following manner. It has necessitated certain government actions, which sometimes have required oversight. In Kenya, for example, the curfews and lockdowns that were introduced resulted in the deaths of at least 15 people at the hands of security services who were enforcing curfews and lockdowns. In Tanzania, journalists were being jailed for writing stories or broadcasting stories about COVID. So they went down on infection in Tanzania. Burundi, of course, up to today continues to be in denial. They say they don't have any COVID cases. In Uganda, COVID was instrumentalized because, as you know, there was an election. Early this year, and COVID was also used to restrict freedom of movement. And journalists were very clearly threatened. They were told that if they showed up in certain meetings, they would be beaten. That was the Inspector General of the police. So against this backdrop that COVID in itself, yes, exists as an issue, but it has complicated already existing press freedom challenges. Because one, of course, is the challenges of access to information. Governments are not always forthcoming, and sometimes when they are forthcoming, their access to expertise. They have dominated, in the case of Kenya, for example, they have tended to dominate narratives, so that even when the government experts are wrong, they don't take it very kindly when journalists seek expertise outside what government is consulting. That presents an issue. But as I also mentioned earlier, the COVID has basically changed people's lives, changed consumption habits, affect media very directly, especially where, you know, those of us who are in spaces like Kenya and Uganda, and we thought we had vibrant media, we have been stripped naked because the model of commercial media has been challenged. I don't think it's ever been challenged that it has been, resulting in the Kenya case in the retrenchment of 300 journalists in a space of less than 1 year. What I think that has basically said is that the loss of focus from public broadcasters and community media is something that probably needs more attention, because for some reason we have neglected community media, and those are the ones that probably would provide information to communities. And the fact that they were in such a state of neglect meant that when commercial private media was facing these severe challenges because of COVID, there was no place for the country to fall back on. And therefore that then has created an information gap that generates this crisis that I think Eugene was talking about, fake news, because every time you have a vacuum, then you know you generate that crisis. What else would I say about, so one, instrumentalization of COVID, but then now coming directly, Suzanne, to the question you asked about audit of finances, is that governments generally in the region have been very touchy about being held to account on the use of finances with regard to managing COVID-19. In Kenya, which I'm probably more familiar with in this regard, is that we've made millionaires and billionaires, overnight millionaires and billionaires out of COVID, when in fact the things that government had pledged to facilitate and to provide have not been done. And when media has gone asking those questions, there have been very, very dire consequences, including arrests, threats, intimidation, refusal to pay advertising bills. So it's I think it provides a broad frame for us to be able to discuss the state of media freedom. COVID is an important backdrop.
Great. That's quite interesting, Mr. Makokha. I think the thing that I'm hearing is, just how COVID affects people with underlying conditions more. That's just the same way it's affected media, in terms of media already had existing issues with press freedom, and now COVID just came to like kind of catalyze that more, and it's just being brought to the fore even more. And I'd like to pick up on an issue that you've actually talked about concerning, the private commercial media houses that we have currently. And you've talked about the loss of income revenues, and people spending less, and therefore journalists being retrenched up to 300, you've mentioned. And so it continues to seem clear, that the issues of interests and ownership and economic viability are still playing quite strongly, even during this COVID period. And so I think I just want to follow that up with, the issue of objectivity in the face of interests and ownership from different people, and also with the governments in place. I don't know how Ghana is dealing with this in terms of just remaining objective as the media, giving information that is truthful. And I know truth can be relative, but just continuing to give objective and truthful information. How has the media in Ghana been dealing with the issue of interests and in objectivity just in general, and especially during this COVID period?
Well, I think no matter how objective you want to be, one party or the other may not be enthused if the information you are churning out probably do not go in their favor. But I think fairness for me is the key word. Whatever activity you want to undertake as a media organization or as a journalist, I think there is always that urge to have the bit of subjectivity because of personal biases and all that. But as a professional, you definitely know that you have to shift those aside and be as objective as possible, because that is the fulcrum of the independence that we strive for. Because in your drive to serve the public interest, there are times that you may probably be a bit personal. And I think that is where sometimes as journalists we kind of falter, where to really be as objective as possible and shift our biases aside and give the public the truth as the matters unfold. So in essence, in the past couple of days, the past week, driving to this day being International Press Freedom Day, there's been the talk of the culture of silence in a section of Ghanaian public creeping into the Ghanaian society. And one of the argument has been that it seems the area of objectivity is rather skewed towards one political group or the other, and people are a bit scared of speaking truth to power as it stands now. In other words, what pertained in the previous administration is not what is existing currently. So journalists are a bit scared of speaking out when it comes to things that are happening in the economy, for instance. And the media houses have always also maintained that we do our jobs without fear. And the issue of objectivity is what drives the type of activities we do. For me, it has always been, is it in the public interest? And that is what will bring out whether indeed you are being objective. Because there are times that we seem to be doing a lot, but they do not inure to the benefit of the public. For instance, in the media landscape today in Ghana, you realize that most of the media houses are owned by people who have political interest. And journalists working on these platforms are sometimes kind of challenged in speaking truth to power. For instance, if my media organization is owned by somebody who is from party A, and I'm supposed to speak objectively about the party A, I'm kind of limited. And that is a form of censorship that affects the objectivity of the journalist. So there has always been the argument that so long as the media ownerships are skewed towards people with political interest, objectivity is sometimes abused in a way, because like we said, there are economic aspects of the person who is practicing journalism or the media professional. And if the organization that is feeding you is towing such a political line, how objective can you be so that you do not lose your source of economic livelihood? So I must say that it's a very broad area, which anytime I talk about it, I say that if you want to be as objective as possible in discussing issues of objectivity in the media, then you may probably look at the political interest, the economic interest, as well as even the social cultural settings of where your media organization is operating. But if you are to look at the public interest, then you can be as objective as possible, irrespective of which media organization you work with. So in Ghana, I must say that because of the political interests of the media owners, objectivity is sometimes skewed, and that in a way also threatens the public good in terms of delivering quality information and instilling freedom.
All right, thanks. So what I hear is it can be a quite a tough balance to achieve objectivity, especially with all the interests that are involved. Yes, so that's quite interesting. Mwape, I can see you're with us. I don't know if you can hear us. Would you like to chime into this conversation about objectivity and interest in the media? And also, since you're with us now, you can also give us just a brief on the state of the press freedom in Zambia, especially in relation to the pandemic. Over to you. The floor is yours.
My apologies, I've been struggling with the net for some time.
No problem.
I had to move from different rooms to try and see where I can get the proper network. The media status currently in Zambia, in as far as freedom is concerned, can be described to be relatively fair. Fair on the fact that we can still be able to question the authorities on certain matters that we feel are of public good, except that we have to struggle to get information through owing to the absence of certain pieces of law that can support the work of the journalists. For example, over the years, we have been pushing for the access to information law, which has not been coming through. And the major challenge that we have is that we have been depending on politicians to push this agenda. And most of the people that are in parliament are not actually journalists. And the understanding that this particular law would only favor journalists, the misunderstanding that this law will favor journalists as opposed to favoring the overall Zambians, also seems to have given this piece of legislation little attention and interest from the political players. The media in Zambia has been advocating for this law and also carrying out sensitizations in communities to make the community understand that the access to information law which is being sought is not for journalists but for ordinary Zambians as well, because it is not the journalists that really need the information, but it's the public that need the information, and the journalists are just doing the work on behalf of the communities. When it comes to the issue to do with the COVID-19, I think the media industry in Zambia has been largely affected on the fact that coverage of stories around issues to do with the COVID donations, COVID allocation of funds has been quite a challenge in that we have to depend on ministerial statements coming from, for example, the Ministry of Health, while other information as to do with the amount of resources the government has been able to acquire in this fight from cooperating partners in multinational organizations has been also a challenge. Recently, there was a preliminary audit which was released by our Office of the Auditor General in Zambia, where it was disclosed that most of the COVID supplies and donations were not properly accounted for. Trying to get details from the line ministry on that aspect has been a bit of a challenge, and we keep on being assuring that they'll be able to compile reports and give us information around that. So we ask ourselves, probably the situation could have been different if we had the access to information. Law would have compelled the government authorities to give us the information using that particular law, but we don't have it. And so we have to depend on whatever is available. And as regards to issues to do with marketing, it has been difficult for media institutions to get business out of the corporate institutions on account that their businesses have been failing to make profit. And so on market-wise, the media institutions in Zambia have also been affected in that regard. Yeah, I think that's it.
Oh, that's very interesting. You talked about quite a few issues that I think are quite interesting. The fact that there's little attention that is paid by some of your legislators in following up on the legal framework to just ensure media freedom is actually quite alarming. And also just you've talked about issues that your fellow panelists have also raised concerning the access to information, and that's quite interesting. Before we move on to the next question, I want to pick out one question from the chat, and someone has asked a question that I find very interesting. The person has asked, should the media offer solutions or just report and expose? I don't know who would like to answer this question. It's free for whoever one of you wants to answer. So if you'd like to answer, just put on your mic and go ahead. The question that has been asked is, should the media offer solutions or just report and expose the issues?
Let me attempt that. The thing is that traditionally we have thought about the role of the media in advancing society's causes has been indirect. That as the media provides critical information, as the media holds power to account, and as the media places certain issues on the policy agenda, then indirectly the media affects society and helps society to advance. But there's a growing school of thought that says, no, the media needs to step out a little more and be able to effect change itself. It's a debatable approach, the whole idea of a media that is interested in what is happening in society and actively participating in that. And it's one of the schools of thought that I ascribe to, especially if you come from a climate change background, as I am, or if you come from a health reporter's background, that the media can actually go out and initiate processes that helps community down a path that can be defined as good. So I think, yes, beyond reporting, the media has a role. And even if that role is not simply going out and actually doing something about the situation on the ground, but at least the media has to increasingly, again, this is controversial, play a certain role that makes it an advocate for what is supposed to be right, And that is where the media may deliberately take positions on certain issues. Now, we have been having the conversation around fake news that's spreading. I do believe that on the issue of facts, there really can't be multiple facts, but on perspectives, there can be many perspectives. Should the media allow multiple perspectives, even if some of those perspectives are dangerous to society? We've seen very strong voices that have come up, for example, to say that the COVID-19 vaccines are dangerous. Should the media, in the name of objectivity, which Kofi was discussing, in the name of just reporting, give room to all those voices and these debates on these issues, knowing that there is a high risk of the public being misled by some of these perspectives? And I think that is when I believe that the media needs to step out a little more from its traditional role and fall behind a certain cause and drive it.
Okay. Can I continue from where Eugene left?
Go ahead, Kofi, go ahead.
Okay, I think that's a very interesting subject. The first thing that I want to say is that when we say the media sets the agenda, what is the end result of setting an agenda? I believe impact is something that should drive the agenda that you want to set. And one of the things we learn in journalism school is to ask yourself the question of, so what? So what is the essence of all the information you are churning out? What do you want to achieve with it? So if it's just about information dissemination, then probably we will not achieve our goals as journalists, especially in this part of the world where people are not that discerning, and the media is seen or regarded as where people go to be educated, not just be informed, and of course, as well as get entertained. So the educational aspect of it is where we need to bring in the issue of development journalism. So if we don't become the change agents, then our journalism will probably not make the impact that we desire. So I think traditionally, we may be seen to be just informing, but the way in which our societies are designed, and I think it cuts across the entire African continent, if we don't play that educational role of ensuring that we give people right information for them to make the right decisions, to make their lives better, then as media practitioners, we've not achieved our goals. So for me, informing alone is not enough. But being impactful, setting an agenda that will drive society to its desirable development pathway is the way to go for any media organization or a journalist to achieve a sustainable development goal. Thank you.
That's quite interesting. Mr. Makokha, I don't know if you would like to chime into this, but before you go, I find it very interesting, the question that you asked, Eugene, about should the media allow multiple perspectives, even though they could be dangerous? That's something you could address as you talk about this a little bit, Mr. Makokha, before we go to the final questions that we will have. I don't know if you have an opinion on this. Would you like to share it?
Yeah. Thanks, Suzanne. I'm a purist on this one, and the reason I insist is that the media's role is to be a public sphere. It's the new arena where people debate ideas, and also just in terms of the expertise, the kind of problems that society is confronted with sometimes are beyond the pale of the knowledge of journalists. We are sort of trained to be jacks of all trades. I think the best that media can do, especially on questions like COVID-19 and other complex issues, is to make sure that the media is available and seeks out as many experts as possible. I think there is enough expertise on the African continent to resolve some of the problems that Philip Ibsen was raising. So it would just, in my view, the media should not set out to find solutions per se, but rather look to those experts and let ensure the public has the full benefit of the various options that are available to them. If there are debates about vaccines and what to do about vaccines, I know, for example, that in Rwanda, they are setting up a manufacturing plant to sort of like produce vaccines. Other people are coming forward. I think they are Kenya and other places. And I think just being able to say, how do you want to deal with this problem is sufficient. There is enough work just providing information so that the population has sufficient meat to bite into, for lack of a better phrase, when debating options and choices. That would just what I probably would like to say about that.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Makokha. Now I can see our time is fast spent, and so as we wind up this session, I'd like us to look at, just to hear from you, what solutions do we have to the challenges we've talked about through this hour? What is your view about what the citizenry and other stakeholders in this field should do, because it's not just the privy of journalists to protect press freedom. So what other things can stakeholders do? And maybe even as you talk through this, what would an ideal press space look like to you? So I'll go to each of you so that we can talk about some of the solutions, and then after that we'll wind up and finish. So I'd like to start with Aisha. I don't know if Aisha, you can hear me. Can you hear me, Aisha? Because I can see you. Okay. If I can't get Aisha, probably we can go to Mwape. Mwape, can you hear me? No. You can hear me? Oh, please unmute yourself. I think we can't hear you. Okay. All right, just unmute yourself. I think you're still on mute. Okay. As we look for Mwape, probably we can go back to Eugene. Would you like to discuss what are some of the solutions that we could be looking at in the future?
I think one of the best places to start is that the media needs to own and take up the campaign for a freer press. I think, like Mwape mentioned, usually the demand for a free press comes from outside of the press. And even if journalists are involved, it's through a civil society-driven process. We do not see sufficient implication of editorial structures in driving the campaign for free press. We need to get to a point where the owners of media organizations and the managers of radio stations, TVs, and newspapers understand that freedom of press or on free press actually affect their business model, and that their business model is quite hinged on the press being free to a very great extent. The next thing one might consider would be movement building. So far, again, we've seen that. I'm now basing my discussion on the example of Cameroon, is that the campaigns and advocacy for press freedom is usually narrow, led by one organization or the other, is disjointed, sometimes it's even fractured. We need to move from that and move into a state where we are actually doing movement building, where success will come through organizing and helping to activate the will and the capacity of people and organizations to demand a freer press. Where we get to a point where we understand that the press is not the only beneficiary of a free press, but that it's even the democratic structures of our countries that are the primary beneficiaries of a free press, so that the demand for a free press goes beyond the press itself. I think those are two places that I would recommend we start.
All right, thank you for that. I'd like to go on quickly to Kofi. Would you like to chime into this conversation?
Okay, I think I must say that whether we like it or not, media will continue to be the fourth estate of the realm. And most especially, I expect state institutions, especially the security agencies and the judiciary, should see the media as allies in development and allow true expression of press freedom. Because without the media, I don't see how development can really thrive. Ghana, as an example, has been fortunate enough to pass the Right to Information Bill, and it came into effect in 2020. In fact, this has been a giant step to media freedom, though it's yet to be fully entrenched in terms of practicality in access information with ease. I must say that this act eases the challenge of access to information, and I believe this is something that on the continent we can all begin to look at. Access to information is very important. It's one of the tools that we can use to fight fake news, which of course is also threatening press freedom. But generally, I believe if journalists are able to verify documents and access credible information, we will be able to fight this phenomenon of fake news, and people will have access to quality information that will help them make informed decisions. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. I'd like to go to Aisha. Aisha, can you hear us? As we wind up, we just want to hear some thoughts about what your solutions are for the gaps in press freedom. Can you hear us, Aisha? No. Okay. So we're going to go to Mr. Makokha. Would you like to? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Suzanne. Two things. I think the first is to frame freedom of the press and freedom of the media within the broader framework of rights. It is a right, and so the fact that media has sometimes tended to separate itself from the campaign for or the demand for other rights sometimes isolates it and makes it easy to pick it off and harass it. I would start from there by saying that the posture, I think, in terms of securing media freedom, needs to change from defending to actually demanding a facilitative role, from government in terms of making sure that if media is actually as important as we believe it is in democracy, it needs to be facilitated to operate not just at the commercial level, but also at the public level and at the community level. And the second thing is that some of those demands can actually be lodged through litigation. As I mentioned earlier, many of our countries have laws and constitutions that protect the media, but which have not been activated. I think the media sector and civil society must be a lot more aggressive in demanding those rights. Thirdly, media also must secure its space by improving its practice so that the places where the threats emanate from, such as libel and defamation and large awards, can actually be stemmed off. But my biggest frustration with media freedom debates is that many of us are playing defense in a very aggressive environment. And I think that needs to change so that we are demanding more facilitation. Just the way, we talk about universal free education, universal health, I think we also must begin to frame this and say universal access to information is equally a right, and creating the blocks to enable citizens to actually access that information, which then means that you secure the place of media.
All right. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Is Mwape on the line? No. Okay. All right. So I think we've picked out a few solutions that can help probably make this space more free. And just to pick out on a few issues that you've all talked about, the issue of access to information and press freedom being a right, just like universal healthcare, universal education, so should press freedom be considered in that sense. And I really like that, the press is not the only beneficiary of a free press. It's actually it has a multiplier effect to the rest of the countries, to the continent as a whole. And so these are good thoughts to actually finish this conversation in. We're just about 1 minute left. Just 1 minute. Sorry. Okay. I don't know if I had someone, but so we're just left with 1 more minute, and I would like to just say thank you so much for participating in this conversation. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the people who are on the chat. You have very interesting thoughts right there. Let's keep this conversation going. And yeah, just to say thank you for joining us today, and I wish you all a happy World Press Freedom Day. I hope that's how it's phrased. And yes, just again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much to my guests. It was a pleasure having you.
A pleasure being here too.
Thank you for having me.